Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive question. How do economists actually measure a country's true health and progress? It's a topic that genuinely touches all of our lives, whether we realize it or not. We're going to be walking through Chapter 2 of the Standard Economics textbook, looking specifically at the indicators of growth and development. Now, you hear politicians and news anchors throw around buzzwords like GDP, national income, and economic growth all the time, right? But what do these terms actually mean for you and me? How do we take the pulse of an entire nation and confidently say, yes, things are definitely getting better? Well, let's find out.
We absolutely have to start by busting a massive misconception. Does a country simply making more money mean its people are actually living better lives? Think about it for a second. If a nation's overall bank account swells up, does that automatically guarantee we'll see less poverty, better hospitals, or higher quality schools for its citizens? For a long time, the world assumed the answer was a simple yes. But as we'll see today, the reality is much, much more complex.
And that brilliantly illustrates the core conflict of our entire explainer: economic growth versus economic development. Listen, growth is really just an occurrence. It's a quantitative change, literally just an economy producing more physical goods and services. It's super narrow, and frankly, it's pretty easy to measure. You just count the cash. But development, that's a whole different beast. Development is this incredibly complex, multidimensional process. It requires both quantitative and qualitative changes. It's broad, it encompasses real social progress, and it is notoriously hard to measure because, well, you're trying to put a number on human well-being. So here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at growth versus development. Then we'll examine the 4 specific tools economists use, measuring with national income, per capita income, physical quality of life, and finally, the Human Development Index.
Section 1. Growth versus Development. Understanding the Basics.
Let's see how this builds right from the foundation. You honestly can't understand modern economics without grasping this distinction. I absolutely love this quote by economist Gerald Mayer. He perfectly captures the essence of it. Development is growth plus change. It's so simple, right? Development requires structural changes in a society, not just a fatter national bank account. It means actually taking that newly generated wealth from your economic growth and using it to fundamentally change the fabric of society. Things like reducing inequality, generating real employment, and shifting away from backward agricultural methods toward modern technology and services. So the takeaway here is that you can totally have economic growth without any actual economic development if the society itself isn't improving. You can see the stark contrasts right here on the table. Growth is quantitative, and it can happen incredibly fast. Like if a country discovers a new oil reserve, boom, rapid growth. But development, that is a slow, generational process, because changing institutions and improving human education takes decades. Growth focuses on distributing the resources we already have, whereas development tackles the much harder problem of how to utilize completely untapped resources.
Moving right along to Section 2, Measuring with National Income, the first indicator.
Today, we're basically acting like doctors using different thermometers to check a nation's health. Let's look at the very first, most basic tool economists historically reached for. Simply put, if the total value of all the stuff a country makes, its real total output, keeps going up over a long period, economists say the country is experiencing growth. Now, notice that little phrase, calculated at constant prices. That is absolutely vital. Why? Because if we just looked at current prices, inflation could totally trick us into thinking the economy grew, when in reality, stuff just got more expensive. We want to see a true, physical increase in the actual volume of goods and services.
Okay, now look at this data from 2014. India's growth rate is sitting at a massive 7.3%, while Norway is way down at 2.2%. You'd look at that and think India is way more developed, right? No way. Norway is already highly developed. Their goal is simply to maintain their incredibly high standard of living, so a 2% growth is perfectly fine for them. Developing nations like India, on the other hand, require rapid, huge percentage growth just to try and close that massive gap and lift their populations out of poverty.
But here's the catch. Using national income as your only thermometer is deeply flawed. First off, accurately counting every single thing a country produces is practically impossible. Think about all the hidden cash, barter systems, or farmers just eating their own crops. None of that gets counted. Second, and this is the big one, it completely ignores population size. If your national income goes up by 5%, but your population explodes by 10%, your people are actually getting poorer. Plus, international comparisons are a total nightmare, because different countries use totally different math to calculate this stuff.
Which brings us to Section 3, the per capita income, the second indicator.
To fix that glaring population blind spot we just talked about, economists stepped it up to our second indicator. This is a much better tool because it tells us the average slice of the pie that each citizen actually gets. By taking the gross national income and just dividing it by the total population, we zoom in on the individual standard of living. In fact, the United Nations highly recommended this metric because it finally forces the human element, the actual people, into the mathematical equation.
When we look at the actual numbers, the reality hits pretty hard. Using purchasing power parity so we can compare the currencies fairly, we see Norway's average individual income in 2014 was just shy of $65,000. India's around $5,500. To put that into perspective, an individual in Norway is bringing in roughly 11 to 12 times more money than an individual in India. This average income metric gives us a drastically clearer picture of the day-to-day economic reality for the people actually living inside these borders.
But hold on, it's still not perfect. A high average income can be a massive illusion. Why? Because it is just a mathematical average. Imagine you have 10 billionaires living in a small town of 1,000 people who are otherwise living in extreme poverty. The average income of that town is going to look fantastic on paper, but the reality for 99% of those people is incredibly bleak. Per capita income completely hides massive inequality and the unequal distribution of wealth. And let's not forget, we usually only get perfect population data during a census, which in places like India is only every 10 years. So for the other 9 years, we're basically just making educated guesses.
All right, Section 4, Physical Quality of Life, Beyond Just Money.
Since we've established that money alone, whether total or average, can't guarantee equitable distribution or a good life, economists shifted gears to measure human welfare directly. Enter the Physical Quality of Life Index, or PQLI. Created by economist Morris Davis Morris, this index actually throws income out the window entirely. It measures the physical betterment of human life on a simple scale from 0 to 100. If your country is closer to 100, you are doing fantastic. This index operates on the philosophy that true economic development should fundamentally raise the basic living standards of the poorest citizens, not just pad the bank accounts of the ultra-rich.
Instead of being counting dollars, this index brilliantly grades a country on 3 basic, undeniable human factors. 1. Literacy. Can your population actually read and write? 2. Life expectancy. How long is a child expected to live at birth? That immediately tells us about the quality of nutrition and medical care. And 3. Infant mortality rate. How many babies actually survive their first year? These 3 determinants are incredibly powerful because they show us actual undeniable results, not just how much money a government claims to be spending. You simply cannot fake a high life expectancy.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 5, the Human Development Index, the global standard. Now, the PQLI was a massive step forward, but let's be real, ignoring income entirely isn't super practical. You do need money for a high quality of life. So finally, let's look at the ultimate, most globally recognized measuring stick, the Human Development Index, or HDI. Introduced by the United Nations Development Program in 1990, the HDI was an absolute game changer. It finally married the concepts of social progress and economic progress into one single elegant metric. It acknowledges that, yes, you absolutely need money to live well, but money without health and education is essentially meaningless.
It essentially takes the best parts of everything we've discussed today and averages them out. First, it looks at life expectancy to gauge the health of the nation. Then, it looks at knowledge, calculating both how many years adults actually spent in school and how many years kids are expected to spend in school. And crucially, it brings money back into the equation by measuring a good standard of living through the per capita gross national income. Health, education, and purchasing power. That is the holy trinity of true development.
So how is it scored? Well, all of these factors are calculated and combined into a single number. And the absolute maximum, flawless, perfect score any country can achieve on the HDI is exactly 1.0. A score closer to 1 means you have exceptionally high human development. A score closer to 0 means your country is struggling significantly across those 3 vital pillars of life.
Let's put that into perspective with the 2014 global extremes. Norway sits right at the top of the world with the highest human development, scoring a phenomenal 0.944. America ranks 8th at 0.915. India lands at rank 130 with a score of 0.609, placing it solidly in the moderate human development category. And all the way at the bottom of the 188 countries is Niger with a score of 0.348. This single ranking gives policymakers a crystal clear, undeniably global idea of exactly where they stand and what specific areas, be it schools, hospitals, or wages, they need to aggressively target.
So, what is the crucial takeaway from this entire explainer? It's that economic tools, charts, and national income data are literally just that, tools. The HDI reminds us that economic development is only a mechanism. The ultimate, final goal of literally any economy on Earth should be human welfare. True progress equals economic progress plus social progress. You absolutely cannot have one without the other and still call it development.
Which brings me to the final thought I want to leave you with today. The next time you hear a news report bragging about rising GDP or massive economic growth, I really want you to stop and look around. Look at the schools in your area, look at the hospitals, look at the opportunities available to the poorest members of your society. Ask yourself, are the national bank accounts simply getting bigger, or are the people actually living better lives? Because now, you know exactly what the difference is. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep asking the right questions.